The death of Queen Mary. The final rites for Queen Mary, previously known as Princess Victoria, Mary of Teck, and the widow of King George V. She died just shy of her 86th birthday, and a mere 10 weeks before her granddaughter Queen Elizabeth II was to be crowned. During her last year, Queen Mary grappled with profound grief following the death of her son, King George VI, the third of her children to pass away before her. Her health had been deteriorating due to a gastric illness, confining her to her bed for about a month prior to her passing. Reports suggested that in her final month, she seemed to come to terms with the reality of her condition, feeling that she had accomplished her goal of safeguarding the monarchy and accepting that her life was reaching its natural conclusion. She also experienced discomfort from the light in her room, leading to the drawing of the curtains to shield her eyes. On the 24th of March 1953, Mary reportedly suffered a hemorrhage, prompting immediate concern for her health condition. At 11:40 a.m., a bulletin released from Marlborough House addressed these concerns. Subsequently, a second bulletin at 1:40 p.m. detailed a significant deterioration in her state, indicating a severe weakening of her heart function. As the day progressed, updates were issued at 7 p.m. It was reported that Mary was gradually losing strength but peacefully resting. Tragically, she passed away in her sleep at Marlborough House at 10:20 p.m. The official announcement, released at 11:15 p.m., signed by Sir Horace Evans and Lord Webb Johnson, confirmed her passing. Her daughter, the Princess Royal, was by her side during her final moments. Throughout the day, Mary's children and various members of the royal family by her side. The Duke of Windsor, her eldest son, had visited her twice that day and returned to Marlborough House shortly after her passing. Both the Princess Royal and the Duke of Windsor had curtailed their holiday in the United States and the West Indies due to their mother's worsening condition. Her other surviving son, the Duke of Gloucester, her granddaughters Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, and additional members of the royal family also paid their respects on her last day. The day following Mary's passing saw a steady stream of royal family members visiting Marlborough House to pay their respects. Notably, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, along with a host of other relatives, gathered to honour her memory. In the midst of this, a spokesperson for the Duchess of Windsor, who hadn't accompanied her husband to Britain, expressed her deep distress at the news of Mary's passing. Reactions to Mary's passing were deeply ceremonial and widespread. The banner of her arms, which flew over Marlborough House, was respectfully lowered following the announcement of her death. Across government buildings and warships in the UK and throughout the British Commonwealth, flags were flown at half-mast as a sign of mourning, remaining so after her funeral. At 10:45 p.m, Prime Minister Winston Churchill solemnly informed the House of Commons about her passing. He introduced a motion of condolence, which received support from the Leader of the Opposition. The Federal Parliament of Australia also paid tribute to her legacy. Condolences poured in from various international figures: the King of Sweden, US President, French President, German President, and diplomats from the British Commonwealth, among others. The news of her demise prompted an interruption in the BBC programming at 11:25 p.m. All regular broadcasts were halted, making way for news updates and weather forecasts only. The following day, both courts and the London Stock Exchange held a brief moment of silence before resuming their activities. The royal household observed a month-long mourning period until April the 25th. Official engagements involving the royal family were cancelled during this time. Respecting Mary's passing, although the coronation plans for her granddaughter Queen Elizabeth II proceeded as per Mary's express wishes. The location for her funeral shifted due to the preparations for the upcoming coronation, with Westminster Abbey ruled out as the venue. On the 25th of March, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, a regiment of which Mary was the colonel-in-chief, held a solemn parade dedicated to her memory. The ceremony surrounding Mary's passing continued as her coffin was placed at the Queen's Chapel in Marlborough House grounds on the 26th of March. Members of her household stood guard in vigil over her casket. On the 29th of March, the Archbishop of Canterbury presided over a small service at the chapel, attended by the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen Mother, and other members of the royal family. Floral tributes from close family members adorned the chapel, signifying their deep respect and affection for Mary. A plaque situated in Westminster Hall marked the significant event of her lying in state. The movement of Mary's coffin from Marlborough House to Westminster Hall commenced on the 29th of March at 2:29 p.m., following a route extending a mile and a half. Adorned in her personal standard and topped with a wreath from the Queen, the coffin rested on the gun carriage of the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery. The procession moved from the Mall towards the Horse Guards Parade and into Whitehall, traversing streets filled with an assembly of 500,000 people. The carriage was accompanied by 6 pallbearers, including colonels from the 4 regiments with which Mary held a significant connection. Participating in this grand march were units from various military divisions, numbering 210 members, each from the Royal Air Force and the Brigade of Gurkhas, along with 42 from the Household Cavalry and 262 from the Royal Navy and the Royal Marines. The procession included the massed bands of the Brigade of Gurkhas, 2 footmen, 2 pages, and her steward, all representing Queen Mary's household. The gun carriage, flanked by pallbearers and the Queen's company of the Grenadier Guards, was escorted by notable figures such as the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke of Windsor, the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, Prince George Valdemar of Denmark, members of the British nobility, high-ranking military officers, and representatives from regiments associated with Mary. Throughout the route, military personnel stood in formation with arms reversed, only presenting arms when the gun carriage passed in front of them. The pace of the procession was 80 steps per minute, with gun salutes fired every minute. The entire march lasted 26 minutes, with the coffin arriving at Westminster Hall at 2:55 p.m. At 3 p.m., when the coffin was positioned within Westminster Hall, distinguished members of the royal family, including royal dukes, Mary's brother, grandsons, and other nobility, stood in solemn respect. The Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, the Princess Royal, the Duchesses of Gloucester and Kent, Princess Alexandra, and the Countess of Athlone stood on the opposite side. The Grenadier Guards formed the Guard of Honour, while regiments from the Royal Air Force also stood present. An intimate service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury took place in the presence of royal family members, government officials, and Parliament members and their spouses. Her remains were placed in state from March the 29th to the 31st, 1953, allowing heads of states and nearly 120,000 mourners to pay their respects as they passed by her coffin. The vigil at her coffin was also shared by the Duke of Windsor and the Duke of Gloucester. On the morning of the 31st of March 1953, Mary's remains were transported by car from London to Windsor at 5 a.m. They were then taken to the Albert Memorial Chapel in preparation for a procession within the grounds of Windsor Castle towards St George's Chapel. Mourners departed from London Paddington Station to board a special train heading to Windsor for the funeral. The coffin, borne by 6 military pallbearers selected from regiments associated with Mary, was brought into St George's Chapel. It was solemnly carried through the Great East Door at 11 a.m. The procession was led by Captain Arthur Paget, Lord Claude Hamilton, the Hon John Coke, who carried Mary's insignia and chivalric orders, and the Lord Chamberlain. Following were a host of notable figures, including the Duke of Edinburgh, the Duke of Windsor, the Duke of Gloucester, and the Duke of Kent. During the funeral service, attended by 1,500 mourners, conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Windsor, hymns like "Abide with Me" and "Glorious Things of These Are Spoken" were sung. The coffin was then lowered to the royal vault as the Queen sprinkled earth from Frogmore 3 times onto her grandmother's coffin, marking the Archbishop's declaration of her transition to eternal life. This was followed by the pronouncement, "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." The service concluded with the recital of Dead March. After the ceremony, members of the public were allowed on the castle grounds to pay their respects and view the floral tributes. Simultaneously, a memorial service at St Paul's Cathedral, attended by 4,000 individuals, was held. Mary's body was laid to rest in the royal vault before being interred next to her husband, King George V, in the north nave aisle of St George's Chapel, beneath a significant tomb effigy sculpted by Sir William Reed Dick. In August 1953, it was revealed that through the principal probate registry records that Mary had left an estate valued at £379,864 in her will, later assessed at £406,407.